Welcome to Gemara Academy. In this class, we will learn Tosfos Dibra Maschel, Mao Shetasik Karmelis. Let's begin. Mao Shetasik Karmelis. Abaye asked, when a person picked up an item on Shabbos and he extended his hand out into the Rosh Hashanah, did Chazal give his hand the status of a Karmelis, and therefore he won't be able to bring it back in, because you're not allowed to carry from a Karmelis into Rosh Hashanah, or not? Now, it would seem that if we gave his hand the status of a Karmelis, then it would be considered a Karmelis for any situation, for everything, regarding everything. It's a karmelis. We made it a karmelis. That's what it is. This is especially reinforced by the Gemara later on presenting an explanation that it would be also to bring it back in, not because the hand's a karmelis, but rather because of a knas. The knas says we're not permitting the person to bring it back in. In other words, later on the Gemara said that a possible explanation for why it would be usher for a person to bring his hand back in is not that it's a karmelis, but rather that since he did an isser, Chazal gave him a knas that he can't bring it back in. They didn't say it's a karmelis and therefore he can't bring it back in, but directly they said you're not permitted to bring it back in because you did an isser. And as a result of it only being an isser and not a karmelis, at times Chazal won't give the knas. For example, if the person extended his hand out before Shabbos. So based on that, it would seem, especially because of that, it would seem that if Chazal did give his hand the status of a karmelis, it's a karmelis for all situations, for anything that could possibly come up. The hand's a karmelis, that's what it is. There are no exceptions. And Tosfos is actually going to say that that's not the case. It's a karmelis for a very specific situation. He's going to prove it and then also provide an explanation. How could we say that it's only karmelis for some things and not others? Either it is a karmelis or it's not. So let's see it inside. It's, for example, when he took out his hand, malaya full of things, l'chutz to the outside, to Rosh Hashanah. And the question is specifically when he wants to bring it back. Only if those two conditions are in place, would we make it a karmelis. Number one, the person lifted up an item in Rosh Hashanah, extended his hand outward with it. And number two, he wants to bring it back in. If that's the situation at hand, then we have a question of whether we made it a karmelis or not. But if it's in any other way, then we don't have a question of making his hand a karmelis. So, Tosfos first sits down the facts, and then he'll go on to prove it and explain it. So let's start with the proof. The Hatanam Be'Perek Basar de Eruvin, because we learned in the Mishnah, the last parak of Eruvin, a person is permitted to stand in Rosh Hashanah, and he can carry in Rosh Hashanah. In other words, a person can be in Rosh Hashanah, he sees an object outside of Rosh Hashanah, he can bend down, pick it up, and move it over less than 4 amos in Rosh Hashanah. Now, if his hand was a karmelis, he wouldn't be allowed to do that. He just picked it up from Rosh Hashanah into a karmelis. That was one isser. We didn't say a person could do it. We just said he could. And he can move it into another place in Rosh Hashanah. If it was a karmelis, he's not allowed to do that. So first Tosfos shows that he proved it, that it's specifically limited to our case. Because we see that if the circumstances are different, it's not that he picked up an item and extended his hand outwards. But rather, he wants to move around an item that's outside already. It's okay. Now, what's the explanation? If it's a karmelis, it's a karmelis. How do we distinguish? It says Tosfos will have a karmelis ella le'inyan reshusha aguf sham. It's only a karmelis. When we say it's a karmelis, the question is not that Chazal give it a karmelis universally, but rather did they consider it a karmelis relative to the reshus with the person standing. If the hand is in one reshus and the guf is in another reshus, then there's a thought that Chazal is going to say we're going to consider this a karmelis in regards to this reshus. We would never think a person's hand that's extended into another reshus should be considered a karmelis in regards to the reshus that it's in. Only in regards to the reshus that he's in. Because it's more similar to two reshus. When a person's in one reshus, his hand's extended into another reshus, it seems like two reshus. So Chazal are going to say this is a karmelis relative to this reshus. But relative to the reshus where the hand is extended into, it doesn't seem like two reshus. The hand and the reshus are in one reshus. We're not going to consider it a karmelis. And that's a big chiddush, that we could consider it a karmelis for a specific situation and not across the board. At any rate, to summarize the Tosfos, we basically said that the question of whether we made a person's hand into a karmelis or not is in a very specific situation, and that is that the person extended his hand outwards on Shabbos with items, and the question is is it a karmelis compared to the reshus that he's in? However, if the situation was different, or even if the situation wasn't different, but do we consider it a karmelis to the reshus that it's currently in? The answer is no.